Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
Even words like lean are amazing ways to say that a ton of people are going to lose their job. And the people who remain are going to have more of a job to do, and they are not going to be commensurately paid for that. That's a crazy thing to pack into a tiny word. Transformation, same thing. Your organization is going to be unrecognizable. Your line reports will be different. They will be more numerous. Process will possibly be more complex. Matrixed. You won't know who your boss is. Their accountability will be more limited and yours will somehow be greater. And it's not that you can't have highly functioning matrix organizations or that you can't reduce the amount of excess, because there is sometimes excess in certain roles. But let's talk about people. Work is important and it shouldn't have a body count, and I don't think that's controversial. Work is important and it shouldn't create the circumstances for the breakup of long-term relationships. I don't think that's controversial. Your work shouldn't necessitate you visiting a food bank. These things are not controversial, and that's the one thing I would want to stress for workplaces. I'm not some soft lefty. I like to win and I am commercially savvy. I just think sustainable high performance exists with people who do not feel exploited, who do not wonder if their basic needs are being met either in work or because of work outside of work. And that's what I think we've lost sight of a little bit. The future of work is human, and I'm certain of that.
Today, I'm talking to Professor John Amaechi CBE, an organisational psychologist and founder of APS Intelligence, where he's the leadership transformation expert. His book, The Promises of Giants, was a New York Times and Sunday Times bestseller, in which he draws on his early life in Stockport, his rise to becoming one of the first Britons to play professional basketball in the NBA, and his career since, working with organisations to build authentic and ethical cultures. John is Professor of Leadership at the University of Exeter Business School, a non-executive director of a FTSE 250 company, and in 2023 he received the Sport Industry's Integrity and Impact Award. Oh, and he's also passionate about Star Wars. He was hugely influenced by his mother, and he lives his life inspired by her words that the most unlikely of people, in the most improbable of circumstances, can become extraordinary. In our conversation, John shares what he means by sustainable high performance, why he's deliberately hard to get hold of, and what, as a former elite sportsman, he hates about going to the gym. John, you're a self-confessed nerd. And so I thought it would be great to get nerdy on pressure. How does that sound?
Really good, actually. Perfect.
Good. So let's start. What, John, does pressure mean to you?
In the context of human beings, because I'm no physicist, but in the context of human beings, I think often pressure is simply when a deviation from your normal experience reaches a large enough point and you notice suddenly the difference. So it's either way, by the way. So it can be a deviation in a way that you might consider negative,
yes,
like it's harder, but not within a normal variance, because most people's lives, they aren't. Look, I think workplaces love this idea that we exist at, if you're a 7.5 out of 10, you're always a 7.5 out of 10. And we know we vary around a mode, right? And so pressure to me is the idea that you exceed what is normal parameters for a period of time that is longer than you are used to or have the capacity to manage. And it's also by enough of a margin that you really, really notice. And that can be both ways, because even good stuff, when it happens to you, if it's out of the ordinary, can have that same impact. So I suppose that's a not very good and not very concise way that I'd define.
Well, I love the distinction that you're making there. It can be positive and it can be negative. And I think, the feeling that ignited this podcast for me was, how do we, with this increasing mad, noisy, distracting world, make sure that pressure is an enlivening force, one that keeps you growing. And you use this great phrase about, the expansion of humanness. How do we keep expanding despite everything that's going on around us? That's what excites me. That's what interests me. And that margin that you're talking about, I think, is an interesting distinction for people to say, okay, this is good. This is great. I'm getting better. Oh, yes. Oh, I feel it. And I want to work on the back of it. And then also noticing, actually, now this is at capacity. And if I'm not careful, the pressure is going to tip me over into something that's much more debilitating.
Exactly.
And so I heard you speak and you enlivened me, John, right? So and honestly, this doesn't happen very often for me, I have to tell you. And so I went after you. And that is what I wanted to have this conversation about, was like, your story is so interesting on so many levels around this expansion versus depletion. Your MBA experience, obviously you must have had to learn on some level the drill to manage that sort of pressure to win.
Yeah.
And now with your business and what you do with leaders and your message and your strong voice in terms of what's needed right now is interesting. So how have you learned to deal with that pressure for yourself?
I think most things start with introspection. I don't know if that's what I started my last conversation that you heard with, but I think most things start with introspection. And because if you're not even aware of what your norm is, then any variation threatens it, your idea of yourself. If you're not aware of what your resources are, how much capacity you have in any given moment, you're not tracking it, then you're less able to make decisions that would make more sense when you start to feel these sensations of stress and pressure and pushing.
Yeah.
And you can't differentiate between good pressure, the idea of, wow, this is actually expanding my boundaries and giving me new perspectives or new energy from a different source that I might not have expected, or whether this is stuff where actually this is kind of harming you now. This is deleterious. This is not good for me. So I think knowing yourself, your resources, allows you to do some of the necessary pieces like reframing. You mentioned playing sport. There is pressure playing sport, right? You get paid a good deal of money, disproportionate to many other jobs, to, in my case, put a ball in a hole. And often you have baying crowds around you and numerous people on television and social media telling me how they could have done my job better on that given day. They would have made better decisions. And so some part of this, we talk about reframing for pressure, and it can feel a bit esoteric, but some part's really practical. And the day that I realized that fat bloke on the sideline of my game was irrelevant to my performance was transformative. Because all of a sudden he's yelling really loudly and he's had several beers and he's clearly powerful, because otherwise how can he afford those seats? And so some part of him gained a disproportionate amount of influence on the amount of pressure I felt on a free throw line or when running down the court or when doing a skill. And then one day I looked at him and I realized, he can only talk about what I do. He can't do what I do. He may have watched other people do what I do, but he's got no bearing on me. And it's not that pressure disappeared in whole, but an unnecessary segment of it just evaporated. People often have asked, with all the people jumping, waving behind the backboard, all kinds of other stuff. And it's like, I didn't even see you. I couldn't even hear you. When I missed a free throw, it's because I missed a free throw. You jumping around had no impact because it didn't enhance the pressure for me. It's just not part of the picture. Lots of other pieces were: the context of the game, the score at the time, my fatigue levels. But just one extra piece that didn't need to be there was stripped away.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sense of also the forensic understanding, of yourself and understanding what capacity you already have, but then being very forensic about what external distraction is sucking the hell out of your resource. And I think this is so relevant for the leaders that, we're working with, we're all working with at the moment, because I've had many discussions on this podcast about intrinsic and extrinsic pressure. stimulators. Actually, I was speaking to someone only 2 weeks ago who is the most intrinsically led person I have ever spoken to. Like, she has got the winning barometer is inside her. It's irrelevant what anyone else thinks, to the extent where she actually said, if someone tells me that if I do something, I'm likely to get promotion or I'm likely to do that, it's a complete demotivator for her.
Oh, wow.
Which was fascinating, I felt.
It is.
Yeah. Like, how do you get to that place? And also, is that good?
Is that the place to be? I'm not sure it is.
I know.
Even as you were talking about it, I was like, I'm not sure that is the place to be, because even our internal motivators, our internal senses of pressure need that same forensic examination. We all know people who have perhaps it's an unhelpful voice in their head, or perhaps it's an unhelpful fixation on something that really isn't relevant, or is outside of their area of influence and control, and yet still somehow it's a big part of their sense of pressure or their sense of motivation or ambition. It should be considered in the same way. You know, everybody has that fat bloke in their head as well as the one that stands on my sideline, right? And it's worth examining, does this person have something to offer? Are they a true expert in this? Do they have our best interests at heart?
Yes.
All of those things are part of it, because I think sometimes we manufacture, not on purpose, but human beings have a tendency to try and grab all the pressure elements just in case one of them might be relevant. And I'm a big fan of saying, actually, I'm aware now that I've distracted my mind for 15 minutes with this one piece. Is that something I should be really concerned about? If it is, then for me, it's probably got some actionable elements in it. And if it isn't, it's like, I'm just going to let that go. I'll let it buzz around like an annoying mosquito for a little bit, but eventually I'm just going to have to swat it.
Yes. It seems to me, from listening to you, John, you've got this now down to something that really works for you in terms of how much time. When do you recognize that actually that is now far too much time wasted on? Because I mean, I put myself in this bucket. I chastise myself sometimes because I've just wasted far too much energy on an issue that really didn't deserve my attention. And I also witness leaders doing that too. Is this something you trained yourself in, or what allowed you to become even more deliberate about that amount of time you give something?
I suppose the advantage that you and I both have is that we talk to enough brilliant people. And each of them individually may not have the whole package, but it tends to be that many of them have pieces of it. And so that's what happened. I've talked to people and it's just been, oh. And it's not as easy as, because I think there's kind of some new worldly type of perspective that says, I just dismiss it from my mind. And I don't think it's as simple as that.
No, I don't either.
It's more like a critical questioning of it, as if it was I personify this thing. So 15 minutes I spent thinking about this when I should have been doing something else, because it's often that juxtaposition. If it's in my free time, I allow my brain to do what it will within reason. But if this is something that's really taking up energy and resources, so there's a kind of, is it worth it? Even if it is interesting. So is it interesting? Is it important? Is it informative to the path I'm on right now and the trajectory and the goals that I've set for myself or for the clients that I'm working with right now? And if it is, where does it sit in the priority scheme? And what's the return on the investment of this time spent?
Yes.
Is it something that somebody else would be better off being responsible for, delegating this thought to? These types of things where you suddenly realize, wow, I spent now an additional 3 to 5 minutes thinking about this, but now it's either actioned into a bucket or put into a more cohesive space where I'm really going to have to consider it in a more methodical way. And that's my approach. It's the same thing I do when I start to feel the impacts of stress and pressure, and fatigue for me is how it shows up.
Okay.
I get very, very tired. And that's when I start to examine, right, am I doing something that's causing this? Am I not getting to bed because I'm playing a new video game, which is a habit I have occasionally? Or is it something else about my work? And what is that? And how can I rejig this to get my energy?
Yeah. And I love this focus on your first signs. Shed is written because of those very basic foundational requirements for us to make any of these decisions or choices further up the chain. Like you, sleep is fundamental for me too. And I hear clients say that they're not getting enough sleep, or they're not getting, the amount of exercise they want, for example. I think you talk about the say-do gap.
Yes.
We talk about the no-do gap. I know it, but I don't do it.
Yep.
Being alert to those signs, knowing that actually, if you don't listen to them, the collateral it's going to create, the sort of damage it's going to create on the back of it is worth investing in the sleep right now, actually, even though I might have 15,000 other things that I might be doing. That's helpful, I think, to understand that.
I mean, the data should be compelling for people, right? The data on sleep deprivation and the impact on our creativity and our work and our temperament, on our ability to form and manage teams, all of this stuff. It should be really compelling if you're interested in performance, because that's the thing I liked about your approach when I was listening to you, is that it's not about a kind of, wouldn't it be nice if we all got more sleep and we woke up fresh as a daisy with no wrinkles on our face, and that ship sailed for me, right? But it's the idea of, if you're really interested in performance, then you treat these things as recuperative steps. You treat these things as performance enhancers, marginal gains, that thing that gained traction in the 90s, but only when wasn't any personal effort involved. That's what you should treat it like. And to me, that's what I'm focused on with this. I really want to win. And what helps me win? There's a brilliant guy, Dr. Pete Olusoga. He is wonderful. His brother also does a lot of really interesting stuff, but Pete's brilliant. He's a sports psychologist. Yeah. He talks in some of the most compelling ways ever about recuperation and how I'm sure, dealt with leaders that, I can't possibly sleep for 8 hours a day. I can't possibly take breaks between stuff. I can't possibly hydrate. And he talks really compellingly about just think about the thing that you need to do and how do you make a micro step towards it? Yeah. How do you make sure that you've got back-to-back meetings, but you still have time to get up, stand for 30 seconds, and maybe just do a loop around your area. Yeah. Maybe even run to a water fountain, or walk to a water fountain, take 2 mouthfuls or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Yes. These micro things towards assisting you. Yes, absolutely. And this is scientifically shown, isn't it now? Like, I was showing just a graph the other day from the Microsoft Human Lab experiment that just took, I think, 14 participants in back-to-back meetings, 4 back-to-back, and then a 4 just with a 10-minute break, your micro moment, right? Yeah. And the difference in what's going on in your brain in that time is incredible. Yeah. So it's not a nice to do, it's an essential part of performance, actually. This is the piece to me that always helps me to see the people who aren't really serious about performance. They're often some of the most driven folk you'll meet, but being really serious about performance is not the same as having a super high, almost libido-like drive for work. It's not the same thing, because if you're interested in performance, one of those elements is sustainability, because nobody cares about somebody who is brilliant for a week. We want people who for 250 working days a year can be on top of their game. And to do that requires, as you've pointed out, sleep that is at least adequate. And the more high quality it is, the better your outputs will be. It requires that your body has not been stagnating and you've not just been sat in front of 3 screens for your entire day, every day, and doing nothing else. And the solutions are so simple. Tiny breaks, a water bottle to hydrate, taking time away from your screen to eat. These are simple things, and they're about winning. Absolutely. They're about winning. And also it's an essential modeling from senior leadership in an organization too. I honestly think that's part of what frightens some senior leaders. Many senior leaders have got a very dysmorphic view of younger people. And they think if they model this behavior, then these younger people will take it to an extreme, because they already think they have. Oh, they don't want to come to the office. Oh, they don't want to work 10 hours a day. Again, completely reasonable to not want to work 10 hours a day, by the way. And so they think if they model these appropriate behaviors, they'll end up with lazy people, because they equate not always being seen to be doing something as being lazy. And that's part of the reframing of both stress and recuperation that's required, I think. Yes, absolutely. And so what we're talking about now is what you can take control of within your own choices. I want to go back to the way John defined pressure right at the start. He described it as a deviation from our normal experience, large enough for us to notice the difference. It exceeds our normal parameters for a period of time,
by enough of a margin that we actually notice. This difference can be positive, great, worth the effort, look what I've achieved, or negative, I'm now feeling distress and it's too much for me. I want to summarise 3 points that John's offering here as ways of making sure we choose to keep pressure as an energy for growth. Our expansion requires tracking. John calls it introspection. I often say, become a scientist on your own behaviour. It's important to know yourself, which is not about staying the same. It's about honouring and owning your growth and expansion. We can't improve anything if we're not tracking it. And if we don't track it, we can't distinguish if the pressure or the deviation, as John describes it, is expansive or harmful. So how do we do that? Here's what John does. Take depletion out of the picture. How many things have you got hold of at one time? Do they all need your attention? I loved it when John shared how he tracks this with critical questioning using his irritating mosquito analogy. He intentionally pauses to ask himself, right, I'm aware now that I've distracted my mind for 15 minutes on this. Is it something that deserves my attention right now? And if not, like that buzzing mosquito, I'm going to swat it. I'm not giving it any more of my energy. Here's a summary of the questions we can ask ourselves to intentionally focus our attention. Is it worth it? Even if it's interesting, that's a really big one for me. I can go down rabbit holes. Is it important to the path that I'm on right now? And if it is, where does it sit as a priority? What's the return on investment of time spent on this? Is it the best use of my time, or is it better to just delegate it? And by the way, this can be the attention we pay to people too, not just tasks. People can deplete and expand us. Is your ratio the ratio you want? And John's other recommendation was notice the first signs. We all have them. For me, it's my tonsils and fatigue. When we override these signs, and I'm talking like long-term overriding, when we habitually override them, that's when we run into the danger of teaching our bodies not to take them seriously either. And then we start to not even notice. Interestingly, we don't notice, but others often do. You become unusually snappy as a result of that headache or that back pain or that feeling of extreme fatigue. I make this distinction because sometimes we can deliberately override them. We want to, like staying up all night with a sick child, for example, or working to hit a hard deadline. These moments of pressure, or sprints as we often call them, can usefully build and grow our capacity for what we can handle. But when it's long term, when it becomes a habit, then it can tip us into distress, and that, over time, can become very unhealthy. As John says, being really serious about performance is not the same as a libido-like drive for work. It has to be sustainable, and that does require looking after the basics, your fuel, your conditions for success. One of John's is the protection of his time and his energy and having people around him who do just that. I was curious about that.
What I'm slightly in awe of, John, if I'm honest, is how protected you are by your team. And I've found that really intriguing. Firstly, for myself, but also for the people that I'm working with who sometimes are running massive decisions, right? With very little internal support, or I would say protection around them to enable them to use their brain to make these decisions and choices in a way that benefits, hopefully, them, their team, their organization, the world, right? But to get to you is tricky, right? So yeah. I wanted to talk a bit about that because there's so much you can do as an individual to recover and recoup and be at your best in order to perform under increasing amounts of pressure. There's also, in my view, what you can build a support network around you. Be that support at home if you're a working parent, be that, where is your extra support that's going to enable you to commit to those decisions? Can you tell me how you got to that?
So I'm very privileged, obviously, in that I have a group of people around me that commit to that. I would say that this can be a very middle-class pursuit if you don't have a group
Sure.
of colleagues around you, right? It started by me setting boundaries. That's what it started with. I have I think boundaries are important, expectations are important. I have very, very tight expectations and boundaries. So I am difficult to get face to face, virtually or in person, because that for me requires preparation. I can't just show up and be like, oh, what am I doing now? I need preparation time. So that has to be scheduled and organized. And lots of people want my attention. So that takes organization. However, contacting me via LinkedIn, you will very often find a response. You will very often find a way that I can be deeply approachable, because these things are fleeting and they require my kind of episodic attention. And it's usually a response based on my brain thinking as opposed to huge amounts of prep. And so these are boundaries that give people differential levels of access. And the highest level of in-person access is just the toughest to get, because that is the thing that is, between 7 a.m. and 8 o'clock at night is the most profoundly difficult time to catch me. So my team understands that I have finite resources. Plus, they also know that I'm an extreme introvert and that I find human contact rewarding and exhausting in equal measure. Perhaps more exhausting than rewarding, but not because it's not rewarding, just because, I don't know, it's partly my training, but I think it's also just partly my personality. I can feel what is happening with people, and it comes off in waves. Even as I walk down a street, it comes off them in waves, and it's like I'm just touching, bumping off the edge of their life, and it's exhausting. It's attritional. And so my team knows when they look at my week, by Thursday, John's not going to be the best John that this person could meet. So we're going to bump you to Monday, because it's not that I'll be mean and awful. I don't turn into an ogre, but I'm certainly not my very best at the end of those kinds of experiences. So that's what it is. My boundaries manifest in other people who care about me.
Yeah. That's so important, I think, and hugely undervalued. Understanding what you need, what almost your non-negotiables are for you to be able to perform in a way that makes you feel proud, that is in service to the people that you are working with. I love it. And I relate this whole sort of picking up of energies and feeling like actually there comes a time when you need to power down.
Yeah, it's true. And I think in my role, because I'm a psychologist and a coach as well as an advisor, you see people, and the people I meet trust me deeply and therefore share deeply, and that can be a lot.
Yeah.
I talked to somebody yesterday who was extraordinarily upset as they spoke to me, and for very good reason. And it lives with you until you debrief. Frankly, it's why I go to therapy. Not this particular person, but the experience of soaking up a lot of people's often not brilliant experiences is something you need to offload, which is another, to me, a part of the stress management and another part of the recuperation. I go to the gym twice a week. I hate the gym. I hate the gym. I hate the smell of it. I hate walking in there. I find doing the exercises extraordinarily dull. My trainer is lovely and tolerates the fact that I literally turn my brain off. He nudges me in a direction. I sit at a seat. I lie on a bench. He tells me a number. I do that number. I get up. I move to the next thing. That is what I do. I do it for bone density, because that's important, because I want to be able to still roughhouse with my nieces and nephews, and I still want to be able to move, right, and walk and enjoy this world. And I do therapy once a week for that same reason, but for my psychology and my emotions, not for my bones. And I think there's a very practical approach. Not everybody has access to therapy, but everybody can do something.
Yes.
You can find something that is just for me. Yeah. Just for me.
And also it's that wonderful, I mean, again, if you are lucky enough to have a personal trainer, I've had somebody on this podcast say, it's the one moment in my week where someone else is telling me what to do. And I just automatically follow it, and it does me good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's also that thing, again, we've gone right back down to knowing ourselves, right?
Yeah.
The reason a personal trainer works for me is not because of their expertise, and this is not to cast aspersions at the expertise that they have. It is simply that I am cheap. That's why it works. Because I've paid for a package and if I miss, I don't get that money back. And I'm too cheap to miss. That's it. So because I know myself, I know the thing that will make me drag myself out of bed to go.
Yeah.
And that's really key for people to understand, again, how you manage your life is often is thwarted because you just aren't aware enough or honest enough about the fact that Beachbody is not, you telling me you can get me a Beachbody in 18 weeks is not going to make me show up. And it's not going to make me stop eating chocolate either.
No.
You know, bone density and being able to be active with my family members, my nieces, that's more likely to be the motivator. And why I show up on the day on a granular basis on a grey, rainy morning at 6 o'clock when I have to get there, that's because I'm too cheap to miss it.
So you're putting in some some elements to the choice that makes it much harder not to do it.
Yeah, exactly. They're conditions that simply they add. It's like somebody's put extra salt in my salted caramel. It's like, this is too good. I can't miss this.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because somebody looking at your history would think, why would someone who used to play for the NBA not want to go to the gym, not relish wanting to do that? And so it's good to hear what's actually going on for someone like that.
I mean, I think there's lots of people who forget that once you've done something to the very highest level, I wasn't the best at what I did, but I was at the very highest level. Outside of the excitement of a game, every day was just a collage of mundanity. You get up, I eat a meal that is of no flavor interest. It is nutritionally balanced and dull. I ate the same lunch for a decade: broiled chicken, brown rice, some kind of green, either broccoli or kale or something, every day for a decade in order to be in the kind of shape I needed to be. It's lifting weights, it's running on a treadmill, it's drills. People think it's just getting in the gym and playing. It's drills and drills and drills. It's dullness. And so now the smell of a gym is aversive to me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. And it's interesting also because we do a bit of work with sports clubs and helping, when an elite sportsman or woman is leaving, everything up until that point, as you've just said, has been decided for them. They've got up, their uniform, their kit's been ironed, it's ready to go. The whole day is mapped out for them. So to suddenly turn into somebody who has to make everyday decisions, it's not a practice they've been used to.
Yeah, it's interesting because we too do the same thing. We work with a couple of big sports leagues in America, and we try and start that transition conversation at the beginning.
Yeah, it's vital.
That's the place. As you're inducted into this league and your life is about to transform, now is the point that you need to start thinking about the end, because the end can be whenever.
Yes.
The end can be an ankle or a knee injury away. It can be a family circumstance away. It can be an unknown heart defect away. And we all know that this can happen now, but it can also be somebody else better comes along the way, which is a threat every single year. So you might need to, and also thinking about this makes you a kind of athlete who's more risk averse to some of the things that might otherwise take over your life. It gives you a longer term view to a life beyond sport. So you don't burn through everything you're doing, not just financially, while you're in the league. And I think it's so important for that transition of mindset to begin early. And I think it makes for a more mature, more considered and reasoned athlete, which makes you a better athlete too.
Yeah. Oh, John, I think there's so much resonance there for leaders too, right? So when you're in a room with them working on their next sort of 6 months, year, 2 years, whatever, this idea of reminding them that this is also a personal journey. That actually matters, because all those things you've just said, you could get knocked out by somebody else. You could get suddenly very ill. There could be a crisis in your personal life. All of these things exist for all of us as human beings.
Absolutely.
It's very arrogant of us to think that we are timeless and there forever, however senior you become, right?
Yeah, it's somehow comforting for people to believe that that they aren't subject to the whims like a leaf, young, vibrant, growing, and then at some point less so. And we all have that pathway as human beings. I think one of the things I tell athletes and leaders alike is always remember that your occupation is not your definition. It is dangerous for what you do to become who you are. Because then when you stop doing what you're doing, you stop being who you are. And if you look at the crisis that occurs, and not just, as you pointed out, not just for athletes at the end of their careers, but for lots of senior people, when they stop doing the thing, if they don't automatically, for example, as an executive, move to a non-executive portfolio, which the vast majority of people don't, then all of a sudden you're sat there thinking, who the hell am I? If I'm not telling 15 people what to do in a highly important public company, who am I?
Yeah.
And it also means that while you're doing it, some of the other parts of your life become fallow. What about your partner or your children or your friends? What about your hobbies and the things that energize you and bring you life outside of work? They become fallow because your occupation is your definition, and those things go by the wayside.
Yeah. What are some of the things, the practices that you see leaders doing in your field that you would sort of hold up as best in class to protect that sense of your whole life as opposed to just this role? Is there anything there that you could share? That you witness?
Two things. Then one's very practical and one's weird. The weird one is perspectify, which is not a word, but I like it anyway. It's the idea that sometimes you need to just take a step back from what you're doing and saying, what is this that I'm doing? Because we all get very earnest about what we do.
Yes.
And sometimes when you boil it down to its components, you can realize how silly it is. And I think that's important, right? It doesn't matter if it's a high-paying city job. If what you do is look at these charts and then make some predictions about whether they're going to go up and down and then make some investments based on that prediction, or if you look at an algorithm, and it's like, it just boils it down to a little more basic. So I played professional basketball. I put a ball in a hole for a living. This ball in the background, this was given to me. It turned in wood, and it was given to me by a family called the LeDukes in Newcastle, Indiana. It's a tiny little town in Indiana, and I was there visiting one summer, and they became friends, the whole family. And this is one of my quotes from way back then, and this must have been when I was still in university. So I wasn't even in the pros, hadn't made it. Wow. And it was, basketball is not life. It's simply a foot in the door on the way to the future. It's quite profound for a young me, I think.
Yes.
But it's really fascinating that most people have jobs like that. You're the head of a big FTSE company. Yeah, it's important, but perspectify this thing. And then, is that enough when you think of, is it enough to give nutrition, if you like, to the rest of the components of your life? And I don't think it is. Play some paddle, play some golf if you have to. I don't, but I love paddle. Find a way to connect with people without that being the only gravity of the you that is you. The other thing is, the rest of your life won't happen by accident. The number of leaders, I know you've seen this, but the number of leaders who, I plan to go to the cinema with my kids. I plan to go and see this. It doesn't happen because their business life or their athletic life is scheduled to within a minute.
Yeah.
And their other life isn't. I schedule everything. I know when I'm catching up with my friends because it's in the diary. I've got a group of friends who are very important to me. And if I don't schedule a once a month catch up with them, it doesn't happen. So you know what? We schedule a once a month catch up, because then, occasionally it gets cancelled for one of either their work or my work or something else. But we stay connected in a way that's truly meaningful.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, yes, and yes. And hard sometimes, because the external pulls and pulls and pulls increasingly so. But I think it's vital. And I think it's more and more vital, actually, for us to be able to perform at our best.
If you want to win, if you want to truly be at your best, then these things are not kind of trifling things.
No.
These are core to that sustainable performance. I'm not saying you can't be brilliant for a week or a month, but nobody's brilliant for those 250 days a week for those, so 250 gigs a year, sorry. Nobody's brilliant if they don't have some studs of these experiences within them.
Totally agree. I'm interested, John, in this phrase, which we use a lot, but I'd love your perspective on it. You've talked a lot about if you want to win.
Mm-hmm.
What, in your view, is the energetic difference that you see between people playing to win or playing not to lose?
Oh, I think people playing not to lose play with a recklessness and slightly less strategic approach than people who are playing to win. You can see the kind of energetic compulsion that comes with I don't want to lose, and it's frenetic, and it's like, oh, have I covered this base? Have I covered this base? And so it's all very reactive. Whereas playing to win has a pause before it starts. You don't just step on the court and say, oh, who are we playing today? What's happening in this meeting? Playing to win is strategic, and it is weirdly slower before it becomes pacey. Playing not to lose is frenetic from start to finish and necessarily exhausting because of it. And that's the big difference I see.
Yeah. Also, the picture I get when you describe it like that is the playing not to lose scatters onto other people.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. And actually it does create that image. It wasn't my intent, but I definitely resonate with that. It does. It becomes your freneticism is so kinetic that other people can't help but be impacted by it. And usually not in a useful way. Because it's eventually it's like getting rug burns. It's just there's so much movement going on.
Yeah.
That you can't really match it in any real way. Whereas when somebody's more strategic about it, not only are you in on the early conversation, more likely, so you know the pace and you know the strokes. It's more like rowers rowing together, and you know the stroke. And otherwise, it's like having somebody in the boat who didn't get the brief. They think they're helping, but they're just moving.
Yeah. Oh, it's just so useful, actually, pondering on that right now, because I was talking to somebody to get some feedback about their leader. And the sentence began like this: I dread going to meetings with him. And when I dug more, it was because I don't know what the aim is. We start having a conversation about an issue, and then it changes track halfway through the sentence, and then it's another issue. And then I end up at the end of the meeting with 8 issues that I didn't feel I had when I began the meeting, and all because this person's head is spilling over all of us, and we all leave feeling less able to deal with anything than we did before the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for that person.
Me too.
I'm afraid that too many people mistake activity for advancement. The idea that agenda items must be packed, otherwise we're not making progress. I've got to be covering all the bases unless I'm not doing my job. And it's like there's something about a more strategic, this is what we're going to address today, and I'm going to make sure that you understand this is what we're doing first, or we have collaborated to understand what we're doing first.
Yeah.
Oof. Too many people mistake activity for advancement. I'm going to have to just ponder on that for a minute. I almost want to say nothing for a moment, just to let that sink in. Too many people mistake activity for advancement. It's so true. As humans, we crave progress. It's a biological imperative. And as a consequence, many of us try to achieve progress by doing more and more and more. It requires us to be so bold enough to slow down enough to identify what actually matters most, which counterintuitively often results in us making faster progress. I've been intrigued for a while now by the energetic difference between playing to win and playing not to lose. And I've been gathering evidence of how it plays out for the leaders and teams we work with. The traps we fall into to feel like we're making progress, but actually, more often than not, they add unhelpful pressure. Back-to-back meetings, no breaks, meetings with no specific intentions or outcomes, lack of preparation or follow-up, bumping one-to-one meetings, allowing ourselves to be bossed by external factors rather than slowing down enough to choose. The consequence of this is what often produces this reckless, frenetic approach that John describes, and then it spills onto others. We often describe this as the difference between focusing on what we want to avoid rather than focusing on what we want to create or to cause. Avoid energy rather than approach energy. Contraction rather than expansion. It's palpable and requires us to be bold enough to slow down and decide what really, really deserves our attention. So let's get practical. Take a look at your diary for next week. Be strategic and pick one key moment that matters most. Ask yourself, why does it matter? By the way, notice what you felt when you answered that question. Has it raised your energy for it? If not, is it important enough? If the answer is yes, however, have you scheduled sufficient time to prepare for it? This is the bit that I very rarely see in people's diaries. Actual scheduled time for preparation. What do you need to say no to give it the attention that it really deserves? What does it require of you or your team to go into it playing to win? Now, back to the conversation.
This idea of performance at what cost?
Yeah.
What do you see or fear is happening when people or organizations are performing faster, taking on more, becoming leaner, whatever this current environment is creating within a business? What are the costs that you see?
Well, all the costs are human.
Yes.
Right. So I think what I see is that people are using language that helps justify, at the very least, non-optimal and more often reprehensible treatment of real human beings. Right. Even words like lean are amazing ways to say that a ton of people are going to lose their job. Yes. And the people who remain are going to have more of a job to do, and they are not going to be commensurately paid for that. Right. So that's a crazy thing to pack into a tiny word, right? It's amazing. And it's not what we're talking about, but that's what people mean. Transformation, same thing. Yeah. Your organization is going to be unrecognizable. Your line reports will be different. They will be more numerous. Process will possibly be more complex. Matrixed. You won't know who your boss is, and their accountability will be more limited, and yours will somehow be greater. And it's not that you can't have highly functioning matrix organizations, or that you can't reduce the amount of excess, because there is sometimes excess in certain roles. But let's talk about people, and that happening to people. There's an organization. They are not our client currently, and because we often get to clients who've appeared in the newspapers for things that have gone wrong. There's an organization in the financial sector out there who had one of their employees die on the job. They had a massive heart attack because they'd been working 100-hour days for more than a month. And work is important, and it shouldn't have a body count, and I don't think that's controversial. Work is important, and it shouldn't create the circumstances for the breakup of long-term relationships, romantic relationships in their colleagues. I don't think that's controversial. Your work shouldn't be so onerous, so difficult, so challenging, so whatever else, that your relationships at home suffer. I don't think that's controversial. Your work shouldn't necessitate you visiting a food bank. These things are not controversial, and that's the one thing I would want to stress for workplaces. I'm not some soft lefty. I like to win, and I am commercially savvy, one should say. I just think sustainable high performance exists with people who do not feel exploited, who do not wonder if their basic needs are being met either in work or because of work outside of work. And that's what I think we've lost sight of a little bit. The humanization, all this talk about technology, and it is important, and AI is interesting, if dangerous. But the future of work is human. And I'm certain of that.
Yeah. And it requires people to make some very clear choices about how they want to operate in it. I agree with so much of what you've just said. What I also witness is people losing the sense of their own agency within those sorts of systems.
Yeah, I think People do. I'm not down on all business everywhere. It's simply that what we have right now is something that, as a humanistic psychologist, is really notable, because humanistic psychology, is very much there's a focus on the incongruence between what is the say-do gap, right? What is promised or expected and what is delivered. And I think the problem that work has in this context that we're talking about of the humanness and of is, if you read any large, especially national, multinational organization's website, the picture they paint is a deeply human one. But the experience that many of their colleagues have is not commensurate with that. And it is not out of malice necessarily, but because when you say a simple sentence like, your manager will take an interest in your career, a statement like that is on about 70% of FTSE and the American equivalent websites.
Yeah.
When you say that, there's a cascade of implications for utilization targets, for number of managers you need in an organization, for the skills of managers in your organization. All of this has to be just from that one sentence. And so the gap exists, and that creates that challenge and that sense of hopelessness and perhaps the lack of autonomy in the organization.
Yes. The similarity of the values that gets spun out from organizations with a lack of recognition of the amount of resource and attention that actually deserves.
Yeah. We do this cascade exercise with people by checking their websites and saying, you say this, what will that mean for you, right? And so there's one organization that we worked with that had some of their tiers of management that had 25 direct reports, and they had utilization targets personally that were upwards of 80%. You looked at this and you said, well, you're expected to have quarterly 1-hour conversations with each of your direct reports and have an 80+% utilization target. Those two things are impossible together. That's forgetting the idea of preparing for a conversation with your direct report and writing notes afterwards. Just the hour times 35 people, you have no chance of meeting your utilization target.
Yeah. Yes. The data, huh?
Yeah.
Back
It's
to the
quite
data.
practical sometimes.
Yeah.
Quite pragmatic. It's not just esoteric and fluffy. Yeah.
I agree. I totally agree. So, John, often at this point of the podcast, I ask guests, what would be the 2 pay forwards that you would offer to anyone listening to this podcast wanting to be better under pressure, wanting that energy to fill them in their human expansion? What would be, I'm sure you've got many, but what would you put your money against for the 2 currently for you?
Don't misinterpret the burgeoning sense of anxiety and pressure you feel directly before or when you're going to or preparing for significant events, right? Whether it's a best man speech at a wedding or whether it's a big pitch meeting or whatever it is, there is a sense, even as you think about it, you've got this burgeoning tension that rises in your chest, a tingle almost, and an ominousness. Don't misinterpret this. Human bodies are designed to prepare for stimulus that's significant. And so this ramping up is the pre-injection phase of your booster rockets. It's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
The only thing to remember is you don't want to start that process 4 weeks before you're going to take off. So just remember, right? Oh, I recognize, I know what this is. It's not yet time for this. Yeah. It's not because I'm not prepared. It's just, this is some early work. I'm just priming the pumps here. I'm just doing this, just some early work. So don't misinterpret the anxiety. I help people with their storytelling and their presentation skills. And sometimes you get people, they're so nervous about speaking. It's like, well, I am. When you step in front, you're doing something consequential, but it's just, this is a good thing. If you didn't have it, I don't know what that would mean for you, but I don't think it's good. So that's one of them. The second thing is, get dull and logistic about your self-care. Just get dull and logistical. I don't know if you use a paper diary or Outlook or something else. Get dull and logistical and just start with the tiniest thing. Find yourself a quarter of an hour to do something that's just for you. It's just refilling your cup.
Yeah.
And that's essential. And you'll suddenly notice how many ways you can get 5 minutes into your diary in the course of a day. 5 minutes into your diary over the course of a week.
Yeah. That's very important, dull and logistical.
Yeah, get dull and logistical, right? Just dull. It doesn't have to be this big, magnificent, I'm taking a trek out to the countryside and it's going to take half a day. Or it can just be something tiny, something small to consider.
Yes. Perfect. Before you go, John, I just want to talk about your mother, because one of the things that you said when I first heard you, and I've never forgotten this phrase, you said she had the ability to scoop people up when they walked in the room. And I feel that that is hugely, hugely underestimated as a skill. The ability to scoop people up, irrespective of the pressure, irrespective of what's going on. Also, you described her as having the ability to change their moving state. Now, these all sound like soft skills, but for me, it's essential. And I think that's what I felt from you when you were talking. And I think too often people feel like you're either born with it or that's just what you do. But I don't believe that at all. I think it's a skill and I think it's a practice. And I think we bloody need it more and more.
Yes. People who tell you you're born with anything like that are grifters. They want to convince you that for a small fee of $5.99 a week, I can give you some drip insights and maybe you'll be almost as good as somebody who, that's just nonsense. So presence is, I think the problem is that there's lots of people out there who conflate it with kind of what I consider a rather woo-woo world of mindfulness, which I'm not into. I'm a scientist and I'm into the pragmatic elements of this. Presence is the idea that I am reorienting not just my body, but my mind to the person in front of me or the people in front of me. Yeah. It is my intent. It is not accidental. I am a somewhat small, as I am a huge person, but I am a somewhat smaller entity when nobody is around, quite distinctly quiet and small. And when in the presence of others, it is my intent to ensure that anybody, whether it be the people listening to this or whether it be an audience in person, to know that for the time that I am here, there has only been this. And there's only been you as the person talking to me, but also the other people I know listening are in my mind.
Yes.
I want them to know that what I'm saying is not just crafted because I like to hear myself talk, which I do, but it is crafted with the intent of adding somebody, that there's some nugget in it. And that is what presence feels like to people. The idea that there is a tailoring of this moment for me. Anyone can do that.
I totally agree. And I find it moving hearing you say it, because it's so needed and people deserve it.
Yeah.
Irrespective of the pressure and irrespective of how senior you are. Yes, by all means, boundary your time so that you get the space that you need. But when you are in front of someone, it is your responsibility. Not only that, John, I get energy when I do that, right? I can go in and if I fully commit to being with that person, I probably get more back from them than they get from me. Yeah. And I think that's a really, really important thing to remember in terms of the magic of being human.
There is a reward. Yeah, there is a reward for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure.
Have loved this conversation, John.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.